Hi guys, TotallydubbedHD here, and today I'm doing a video review on the Acer Nitro XV273K. There's a bunch of other letters after it on Amazon.co.uk, but nevertheless, this is a 4K HDR 120Hz/140Hz monitor with an IPS display, quantum dot, and gets to HDR 400. It comes in at £900, so it isn't a cheap monitor. But bearing in mind that the Acer X27 that I previously reviewed came in at just around £2,000, and right now it's about £1,800, that's a lot cheaper. So in this review I'll be comparing it to the X27 and also giving my own input versus my my daily driver, the XF270HU, which to me is arguably the sweet spot when it comes to gaming. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first off, let's talk about the build quality and design. Now Acer have opted for not a bezel-less design, which I'm not quite sure why, but nevertheless there's no a three-sided borderless design. There is pretty thick bezels all the way around. It kind of reminds me of my monitor. There's a star-shaped or triangular-shaped stand, a metal stand, which provides height adjustments to the monitor and tilt adjustments, and also pivots. You can't rotate it around. It also isn't a curved monitor, it's a flat monitor, which I don't have a big problem with. Now in terms of ports, you've got USB 3.0 ports on the left hand side for easy access to your PC, and then you've got HDMI and display port inputs inside as well. I will touch upon those in just a bit, and you'll understand why in a second. Other than that, in terms of build quality and design, they have got fancy RGB lights which are at the bottom. Now these can be enabled via the OSD. You can see I've disabled them because I really couldn't care less about RGB lights. Nevertheless, they are there at the bottom, and they're pretty bright, so you will see them on your desk. So as long as you've got a desk which isn't black or is reflective, then you're going to see those lights shine bright like a diamond, as Rihanna might say. Now, around the back of the monitor, what you'll be able to see is that there is a few set of buttons which can all be customized in terms of quick access. There's a power button all the way at the top, and then there is a little joystick control as well, which allows you to access the OSD. Another thing I'd like to mention about the build quality is that you get these little panels as well that basically isolate the monitor from any sort of glare on the outside world, so you can feel a little bit more immersed with the monitor. These can be removed, as you saw in the video, and be adjusted, so you can kind of flick these back all the way if you so wish. So speaking about the OSD, it can be accessed by pressing the joystick button once, and you can see the custom buttons, which three of them that you can customize. Overdrive, brightness, and input is the ones I've got. Press again and you enter the full OSD. Now the OSD is very comprehensive, and by the way, if you're wondering why brightness is at 0, that's simply because for the camera to pick up the monitor properly, there's so many options within the OSD that you're going to be probably lost at first. But once you get used to it, it actually gets pretty easy to understand how Acer have laid it out. You've got the HDR, which you will need if you're going to use HDR. You've also got the color settings. So for example, you've got the gamma settings, a color temperature, and then you've also got separate pre-assigned modes which you can customize. Then you've got the color space, which you can set it to sRGB, for example. And you can even change it to grayscale mode if you so wish. Audio, so it's got built-in speakers, not ones I would recommend, but useful for Windows notification or basic music listening. You've got here in the gaming section, overdrive, FreeSync, then you've got your aim point which you can enable or disable. Note on FreeSync, now this is an AMD FreeSync certified monitor, but this is also among the first NVIDIA GSync monitors that have been certified as well to be previously FreeSync monitors. So I'll touch on that as well after. OSD settings and then system settings as well. Through here, for example, you'll be able to see that you can change the LED control and enable or disable it. And then you've also got the 4K 144Hz mode in here, which I find a little bit odd to be hidden over here. I would have preferred it in the gaming section, but nevertheless, it is over here. One more thing I wanted to mention about the OSD is that it is a little bit sluggish, depending on movements. As you can see, if I'm hitting the button there, it can take a little bit of time to respond to my actions. So now we get into the picture quality section. Now before I jump into that and before I get into the gaming section, I do want to talk about the setup and inputs of this monitor because it is very important as it will determine how this monitor performs. Now the reason it's so important is simply because this monitor requires two DisplayPort inputs to be used simultaneously with the monitor in order to run 144Hz 4K. Now you might have noticed I excluded HDR in that. And that is simply because HDR becomes disabled once you use those two DisplayPort cables. So you might be wondering, well, why am I using two? I might as well just use one. Well, if you use one, you'll be limited to 120 Hz. No matter what you do, you won't get 144 Hz 4K HDR via one DisplayPort cable on this monitor, which is a shame because the X27 had that. However, as a caveat, that monitor had a limitation. Chroma subsampling, if you're not sure what it is, highly suggest you Google it. It essentially means that text will look a little bit blurrier and it just won't look as clear when it's running at that resolution and at that frame rate. Whereas with this monitor, when you have those two DisplayPort cables, it eliminates that. You run it at 10-bit and you completely eliminate chroma subsampling. But as a con, you do sacrifice HDR and FreeSync /GSync, which is a big deal. So in other words, when it came to my picture quality testing, what I tried to do is have those two DisplayPort cables inputted and ran at 144 Hz, and yes, there was no frame skipping either, and then ran all my calibration software and assessed the screen as it is. Once I was done with that and I wanted to get into gaming, I went into the one DisplayPort input and then started gaming. So all of this is a lot of information to take in, but it's extremely important because a lot of people will completely overlook it. They might look at the 144 Hz OC on the website, they might look at Amazon, they might even look at other YouTubers who haven't fully tested the monitor. Nevertheless, it is very important to bear this in mind. It is a 120 Hz 4K HDR monitor. So with that said, let's get into the numbers and my actual opinion. Now this is an IPS monitor, so you can't expect VA or MVA sort of contrast ratios, but it hits still a 1050:1 contrast ratio. Average delta of 0.88 is absolutely sensational for a gaming monitor. In other words, it's going to be very color accurate if you're going to be photo editing or video editing. However, brightness uniformity isn't its forte. On the left hand side and bottom and right hand side it is kind of lacking. It's not as bright or as accurate in those areas, and in this respect it is because of its technology. The X27 used FALD, whereas this does not have it. In other words, it's not going to be perfectly accurate throughout the screen, and your brightness is going to be flawless and going to get a certain level of HDR either. In other words, it has got its limitations, but still when it comes to photo editing and video editing, I wouldn't have a problem using this monitor whatsoever. Now in terms of my own personal input, apart from the numbers, because the objective data can only get you so far, I must say out the box the monitor looked really, really good. Colors really popped. That IPS monitor really shined through and doesn't have sort of like this kind of glare or this white sort of film that's applied over it like you might see on some other cheaper IPS panels or even VA panels. And sure, the contrast ratio could have been a little bit better. So for example, seeing this Subaru come out a little bit more in comparison to its background, it's still perfectly acceptable when it comes to gaming. I have no complaints whatsoever in this respect, and I must say I was very impressed. No added calibration needed, just out the box does the job. And of course you've got those pre-calibrated profiles, so for example sRGB standard and whatnot on the OSD, so if you want to do that you can do that as well. And then if you're going to be working in that space, for example color editing, video grading or whatever have you, then you can do that as well. Now with that aside, let's talk as well about the FreeSync range and also the G-Sync compatibility. Now, this is among the first NVIDIA G-Sync capable monitors. By that I mean it is and was a FreeSync monitor, but NVIDIA enabled it and tested it and gave it certification for G-Sync. What does this mean? Well, you're going to get tear-free gaming at 120 Hz, which is fantastic. So if you're running, like me, an NVIDIA GTX 1080 or another 10 series or 10 series, 20 series card, then you will have NVIDIA G-Sync running on this monitor as well. So not only does it do FreeSync, but it does G-Sync as well. The only problem with that is that you are going to be limited to 120 Hz. And the fact that, yes, there's going to be a little bit of added input lag when you're running at this. So for example, through TotallydubbedHD, when you can set the overdrive, that's going to be locked. You're not going to be able to use it on extreme. Whereas if you disable G-Sync, in my case, or if you disable FreeSync if you're on an AMD graphics card, you can dial that all the way up to extreme. Now, how does it do when it comes to competitive gaming? Competitive gaming, I mean FPS games like Counter-Strike. In this respect, I was actually very impressed with the Acer monitor. In comparison to the X27, it actually responds very well, and I didn't really have that many complaints about it, to be quite honest with you, because it does the job. Now, bear in mind, it is a 4K monitor. You're going to need a lot of power in order to drive 120 Hz plus solidly at 4K, but if you're going to dial it down, if you're going to play competitive games, I think you're going to be pretty impressed. Now, its input lag is arguably its biggest flaw. It doesn't really compare with a TN panel, nor does it better my XF270HU, which it has got one of the lowest input lags you can potentially find on the market. So what I'm trying to say over here is that yes, it's a very good monitor for competitive gaming. Is it a monitor that is adequate enough for me to play competitive games on it? Personally, no. However, it just depends on your level. Personally, I just wouldn't use this monitor for serious competitive games. But then when we move to more casual games, and you know, I've been playing Destiny 2 for a lot of hours in that game, I must say that this monitor really does excel. And you don't really notice that slightly sluggish input lag. You don't really notice the slightly slower response time over, let's say, a lower class IPS panel which is faster, or a TN panel. It does a very good job. Another thing to add as well is its HDR capabilities. Now, the X27 was absolutely ridiculously good at its HDR capabilities. This, on the other hand, is limited to HDR 400. It's been certified with a HDR 400 standard. Now, quite surprisingly, what I found is that I was still able to hit around 520 nits on non-SDR, so non-HDR, so normal SDR images, and then hit around 560 to 570 nits when I was running a HDR signal through it. So you'll be able to see me quickly showing you this via having a 4K Blu-ray player connected via HDMI, and then running a test on it, and then having a calibrator on another PC. I can just prove to you that this does actually exceed expectations set by Acer. Now, in terms of HDR, how does it compare to other HDR monitors out there, such as the X27? Well, it's simply not as good. I found myself quite often in Destiny 2, which is a HDR enabled game, to be looking at the monitor and being like, this is, I just can't see where I'm going. Not because of the colors were inaccurate, just because in certain dark scenes it was just absolutely impossible to see where I was going. And it does frustrate me a little bit, and of course you can play around with the brightness settings in game, but then it skews the colors and skews the sort of tonal accuracy. So there is these kind of like, yes, it has HDR, but it does come with its shortfalls as well. So it is a little bit annoying at times when you're using it. But nevertheless, color accuracy via HDR really came to life, and it was a beautiful monitor to look at. So overall, I would say that this monitor does a great job when it comes to gaming, especially in terms of the casual gaming scene. I think you won't have any problems. For more competitive gamers, is this a monitor you should consider? Well, Arguably, yes, more than the X27, but still not a monitor that's going to replace your 1080p TN panel, 144 Hz with a quoted 1 millisecond response time. It's just not up to that standard, as in a class-leading TN 144 Hz that one I would recommend, for example. So now we get onto the conclusion. Would I recommend this monitor? Well, this monitor is a 4K 120 Hz HDR monitor. And in the market, you're going to be expected to pay around £900 for such a monitor. If you really want 144 Hz, you're going to have to spend a lot more on the X27 or the Asus equivalent. Now, is it ultimately something I'd recommend? Well, if you're in a market for a 4K HDR monitor and you really want great color accuracy, a decent enough response time and input lag, then this monitor does tick a lot of boxes. I can't lie about that. But is it one that I would personally use? I don't know if my opinion really matters to you guys if you're watching this review, but for someone who's tested around 120 plus monitors and one who games competitively and wants perfect color accuracy, this 1440p monitor does the job for me. It's 144 Hz, one of the lowest input lags you're going to find, and is about half the price of the Nitro monitor that I just reviewed. So personally, I'm sticking with this, and I would highly suggest this to most people. But if you're in the 4K craze and you've got the graphics power behind it, all power to you. Get the Nitro, alternatively spend more, get the X27. So there we go guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Hopefully you've enjoyed this review. If there's anything I've missed out in this review, be sure to put it down in the comments below. I'll try my best to answer them and or get them confirmed by Acer. Do like, comment, subscribe. It always helps the channel grow, and favourite and share if you found this video helpful. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye bye.